Hello children and welcome to the session today. Children, in the previous session we learnt about different materials and their transportation in the plant body. Today in this chapter number 12, we are going to learn about reproduction in plants. Children, we are going to learn about two types of reproduction, asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. And we are also going to understand the ways in which asexual reproduction takes place. So remembering from our previous classes and previous knowledge, we understand what is reproduction. Reproduction is an important characteristic of all living organisms by which they produce individuals of their own kind. We know that if a species stops reproducing, it is going to be completely erased from the earth. Now talking about asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction means a reproduction in which only one parent is required. So in case of plants, there are many reproductive parts. There can be buds coming out of the leaf, buds coming out of the tuber. In some cases, a stem may give rise to a new plant. And in other cases, two stems may be taken together to produce a new plant. Now let us understand all this one by one. So what are the natural methods of vegetative reproduction? The first is stem tubers. Let us understand a video to watch the same. Plants like sweet potato, dahlia can form new plants from a root cutting with a bud. When placed in moist soil, leaves of plants like bryophyllum and begonia produce buds on the notches in their margin. When the leaves get detached from the plant and touch moist soil, the buds grow into new plants. The advantages of vegetative propagation of plants are: the new plants are exact copies of the parent plant. Plants require less time to grow by this method. Plants take less time to bear flowers and fruits. Similarly, an underground stem can be used to create a new plant, as in the case of rhizome. As we can see in this picture, this bulb-like thing that comes out from the base of the plant can grow into a new plant. As in case of onion and garlic, the bulb again is used to reproduce a new plant. In case of runners, so what is happening in case of money plant, which we almost all of us have in our schools and in our home gardens? So what happens if you bend the stem and bury an edge? There are open roots coming out of the stem. If you bury any one of these roots into the soil, you will see a fresh plant sprouting from that area. Then there are adventitious buds in case of bryophyllum leaf. If you look carefully in this picture, you will see how new plants along with roots are coming out from the edge of the plant. This is adventitious bud. Next, there are roots like sweet potato, which can be cut into parts and sown to obtain new plants. There are also some artificial methods of vegetative reproduction. Why are these important? We will understand a little later. So first, as I told you right in the beginning, is by cutting. Stem cuttings, as in case of rose plant, are used to create a whole new plant. Then there is another process of grafting. Now what is grafting? Suppose there are two plants with different characteristics. For example, one plant does not get infected by insects very easily. There is another plant which produces a good amount of fruits on it. So what is done? Grafting is done. The lower portion of one plant is taken and the upper portion of the other plant is taken. So the lower portion is already in the soil. The roots are already in place. The upper part of the new plant is bound to the lower part with the help of a tape. So the lower part is known as the stalk, the upper part is known as scion. Over a period of time, tissues begin to grow and both the parts join together into one new plant. So this is called grafting. Then there is simple layering that we have already done before. There is also a process of air layering in which a amount of artificial tissue is taken from the cell of the main plant and they are planted in a petri dish and they are grown into a new plant inside the lab. This, children, is also the tissue culture technology. Now let's understand the importance or the advantages of vegetative propagation. First, the plants obtained by this method are identical to the parent plant with respect to growth and quality. Therefore, this is definitely useful for people who are cultivating crops or who are into horticulture, that is producing fruits. Next, plants obtained from this method do not reach the maturation phase. They are ready to give rise to fruits or whatever they are supposed to. Then they are resistant to many diseases. Now there are also certain disadvantages of vegetative propagation. Number one, all the negative characteristics of the parents are also carried because the parent and the baby plant are genetically identical. Now because all the plants that are created by a particular method of vegetative propagation are going to be alike, there is going to be no genetic variation. Why is genetic variation important? I will give you a very simple example. So we all know that the COVID virus has been mutating. It has been becoming stronger and stronger. So by becoming stronger, what is happening? It is able to fight multiple medicines, multiple vaccines. So that becomes a plus point in its survival. So that is why genetic mutation in variety is important. It is a very negative example, children, but this touches our daily life. So I think you will understand it very easily. So in case of vegetative propagation, when you are just creating identical plants one after the other, is there any scope for genetic mutation or genetic variation? No, there is no scope. So what is going to happen? Generation after generation, the same plant is going to grow. There will be no betterment. Then the spores of fungi and bacteria may pass from parents to offspring in case of vegetative reproduction, again leading to disease. Now let us understand the sexual mode of reproduction in plants. Sexual reproduction takes place in flowering plants. Flowers are the reproductive parts of a plant. The reproductive parts of a flower are the stamen and pistil. Stamen is the male reproductive organ of the flower. It has a long stalk-like filament and a swollen top called the anther. The anther contains pollen grains that contain male gametes. Pistil, also called the carpel, is the female reproductive organ of the plant. It consists of a top sticky part called the stigma, a tube-like center part called the style, and a smaller bottom called the ovary. The style connects the stigma to the ovary. The ovary contains the ovules. Each ovule contains only one female gamete called egg. A complete flower has all the four whorls: sepals, petals, stamens, and pistil. Flowers of plants like watermelon, cucumber, papaya contain only one reproductive organ, that is only the pistil or stamen. Such flowers are called unisexual flowers. So children, basically what is happening here? The male and female gamete are being produced. Now the male and female gamete have to combine to form a zygote. How will they meet each other? The process is known as pollination. What are the different types of pollinations? Let us understand with the help of a video. Pollination is the process of the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower. Pollination occurs in two ways: self-pollination and cross-pollination. In self-pollination, the pollen grains from the anther of a flower are transferred to the stigma of the same flower or anther flower on the same plant. The Cross-pollination includes the pollen grains from the anther of one flower to be transferred to the stigma of another flower from another plant of the same kind. Wind, insects, birds, and water are some agents that help in pollination. So we know that wind, insects, water, these are some of the means of pollination. Now, after pollination has taken place, the baby cell has to be formed, which is known as fertilization. Now, how does this fertilization take place? Let us again watch a video. Fertilization occurs after pollination. Fertilization is the fusion of the male gamete with the female gamete to produce a zygote. When a pollen grain falls on the stigma of a flower, it grows into a thin pollen tube that penetrates the stigma and passes through the style and enters the ovary. The male gamete comes out of the pollen tube and fuses with the female gamete present in the ovule to form a fertilized egg cell called zygote. Now, this zygote that is formed is actually the seed, which will give rise to a new plant. Now, after this seed is formed, the ovary swells up and it becomes the fruit, and this entire fruit falls off the tree. It is consumed by different insects, animals, human beings, and we discard the seed. When the seed finds the right amount of air, soil, water and sunlight, it will grow into a new plant. Now, let us understand how these seeds are dispersed. So, first example of seed dispersal is by wind. The seeds that are dispersed by wind are very light. As you can see, these two examples where the seeds are very light and they have hair-like structures on them, because of which they can be transported easily. Sometimes what happens, example of peas, bean, castor and cucumber, the fruit just bursts open. When it bursts open, what is going to happen? All the seeds are going to be released in the environment, and whenever they will find suitable conditions, they will grow into a new plant. Seeds like that of coconut and lotus are transported by water. Then animals also play a very important role in the movement of seeds. How? When an animal is sitting in one area, the seeds may stick to its fur on the body, and when it goes to another area, they may be released. So again, I am repeating, when these released seeds are going to find the right temperature, water and air conditions and fertile soil, they are going to grow into a new plant, and this process is known as germination. So in this chapter, we have understood the different stages of reproduction in plants, whether it is sexual or asexual. We have also understood why we undertake vegetative propagation artificially. So I hope you have understood the chapter thoroughly. Thank you for joining us.